Have you seen all those midlife, like cheerleaders almost like midlife, rah-rah, all you have to do is invent yourself? I have trouble relating to those. And if you have trouble relating to those, you're not alone. I think that there's a certain subset of women, us, who aren't necessarily going into midlife with this sense of joy and purpose and like, oh, this is my chance to just, you know, decide I'm a different person. And I know even some of my videos, it sounds like I'm suggesting that you can. I do feel different about midlife now, but that is because of my own journey. So, what I want to do today is just share my manuscript that I've been working on that talks about where I was at. I'll bet if you picked up this title, I know where you're at in life. I'll describe it to you now. How? By sharing my story, because I was once there too. A year and a half ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table, filled with dread, thinking, this cannot be. But back to that in a moment. My true story had begun 3 years prior to that. I may have even been sitting in the very same place, realizing just how stagnant my life had become. It's possible I had even sat in the same chair at the same table when the revelation hit me. I've reached midlife. I have no idea how I got there. And just as frightening, I have no idea where I'm headed. At that point, I had been living in the house for about 12 years. I had moved there with my children when they were much younger. The last one had just moved out, having outgrown the house, the neighborhood, and, in my self-pitying thoughts, me. While they were growing up, the neighborhood suited our lifestyle well. They were close to schools they attended and made friends with other kids on the block. But one by one, they had moved out, leaving me to contend with a house that was falling apart. Now, I want to preface this by saying I cannot understate enough how much involvement I felt in my kids' lives while they were growing up. So the day the last one packed up and moved out, it was an identity crisis in its own right because I had been so involved in their growing up years, my daughter's teen years, just everything involved in, being a mom and shuffling them back and forth to everything. Another story for another time, but maybe I don't put enough of that in this manuscript of just how lost I felt the day my youngest one packed up and moved. And maybe you've got kind of the same thing going on where it's empty nest syndrome, but like in my case, I didn't have a spouse, and I kind of talk about that in a minute, but or you didn't have kids and you're hitting midlife, realizing like, what is this going to look like? Because my path is a little bit different. Um, but I talk about that as I read, so I'll just keep reading. Okay. I had been house poor for years. Even the improved salary I was making could not do justice to the decade of neglect that had all piled up, piece by piece. Quite honestly, the condition of the house matched my internal state. My life felt in dire need of repair, but with no obvious fix. I'd poured my heart and soul into raising these children, but now, with them gone, I felt stripped of my identity. What was I? Who was I now? I suppose this was the time in life when other women felt free. They turned to their relationship with their spouse and could focus on being a parent, a partner, and a wife. I didn't have that luxury. I was long divorced and with no regrets. It had taken years to rebuild from all the damage and chaos that marriage had caused. It was unfortunate, but had brought me my two younger children. My last attempt at a relationship had been with a complete psycho who had reinforced my resigned conclusion that I was better off remaining alone. So I have an older child. I've been married twice, divorced twice. And yeah, my path just didn't fit the same 3.5 kids, a dog, a spouse, a white picket fence that I started feeling like everybody else around me, all the other women at midlife had. And if you can relate, let me know. Mm, Okay, last attempt at a relationship. That had worked well for several years. I could strictly focus on the people who needed me most at that time, my children. But what about now? I had a new grandchild and I felt thrilled to be a first-time grandma, but I could only see my grandson about once a week. Besides, he already had his parents. I no longer knew where I fit in, where I belonged. Even worse, I felt stuck in my demanding jobs I had somehow created into existence for myself due to the field I had chosen. I made decent money, but not nearly enough. It was draining, not what I wanted to be doing for the next 20 years of my life. Even though I felt old to my further frustration, I was still many years from being able to retire. So I was not only stuck in my house, my neighborhood, which I get into pretty soon, but also stuck in my life of just going to work, coming home. My grandson was born in the dead of winter when it was so cold. It was so cold that year that they didn't didn't want to leave the house with him because it was dangerously cold. And so I would go over and see them once a week. And so that's what I refer to in the book, but in the story. But it was frustrating because I wanted to be there and, see him more often, and I wasn't able to. And like I said, I realized that they had their own lives too, and they wanted to enjoy being first-time parents and everything. So, but it just added to the feeling of where do I fit in? What is there left for me? I don't know if you can relate to any of this, of feeling trapped in a life that you've created for yourself. And maybe it didn't start out that way. It started out that you were doing the right things. You were doing all the things you were supposed to do. You raised kids, you got married, but then relationships fell apart. Your partnership fell apart. Or maybe you never were married and you thought that life worked for you until you realized you were at midlife and started wondering, like, who is there for me? Who's there? Okay. I guess maybe I'll stop here and I'll just kind of mark this and I will start the next video with more of my story. And right now, I just kind of want to know your comments. I want to hear from you if you can relate to this story, because I think too much of the time so far I've gone into rah-rah, this is all great. Um, and I just want you to know that I wasn't always this way. I was feeling very trapped, as you can tell here, and you'll be able to see even more how trapped I was feeling when I go further into living in the house and everything that was going on around me. And in a way, it was like life was moving on for everybody but me. And things were happening around me, not in a good way, things that I felt like I had no control over. And eventually it did prompt major life changes for me, but I'm going to save that for future videos. So I'll stop here. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you can relate to this feeling of what I'm describing. And I'll see you in the next video.